I was the cool kid in high school because I was getting hit by cars before I could drive.
That is so cool.
I was jumping off buildings, lighting myself on fire. When I turned 18, I jetted out to California to pursue my dream in Hollywood, become a stuntman, and realized real quickly how much it hurt and how much nobody cared.
Josh Zolin is the CEO of Windy City Equipment and host of Blue is the New White. A former Hollywood stuntman turned blue-collar business builder, Josh grew a local repair shop into a multi-state service company. Today, he's a speaker, author, and entrepreneur focused on redefining success in the trades and building teams that lead with grit, growth, and real human connection.
My dad had gotten out of the stunt business. He began repairing restaurant equipment. So I called him up one day and I said, I want to come work with you.
How did you get there? Did you join directly your father and help him repair stuff?
My dad is not a handout kind of guy.
Josh, how do I go from stuntman for Hollywood to business owner of a 65 employees business?
Well, first, you have to beat the hell out of your ego quite a bit. Considering that was what I thought I was going to do the rest of my life.
Right.
How deep do you want me to go?
As deep as it goes, man.
All right. So I'll kind of set the stage here, no pun intended, right, in the film industry. But the original family business was not blue-collar skilled trades. It wasn't any of that. Original family business was stunts, right? Stunt performers in Hollywood. My grandfather was one of the trailblazers in the industry. He did all the stunts for Charles Bronson in all of his movies and worked closely with some of the greats like Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris and all of them. And so he was the original stuntman in the family. I had 3 uncles and my mom who are all in the stunt business as well. So our name is kind of ingrained in the film industry that way. And my mom and my dad met because my grandfather had a stunt school out in California and my mom was teaching it. And so my dad wanted to be a stuntman. And so he went through the school. So my mom was a stunt woman. My dad was a stuntman. My grandfather and all my uncles on my mom's side were stunt people. And that was my path. So I didn't want to go to college. I didn't need to go to college. I was the cool kid in high school because I was getting hit by cars before I could drive. I was jumping off buildings, lighting myself on fire, and walking on water at that point because, how many people do you know that do that kind of stuff? So when I turned 18, I moved from where I was living at the time in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which we had a stunt school out there too. I began teaching that when I was about 14 years old. So when I turned 18, I jetted out to California to pursue my dream in Hollywood and become a stuntman and realized real quickly how much it hurt and how much nobody cared. Really, that was a wake-up call for me. I did okay. I was able to get jobs even during the writer's strike, which is what was happening during this time. At some point, I looked myself in the mirror and I said, I don't want to be a rag doll for somebody that people think is more important than me. And then so that was a realization. Meanwhile, simultaneously, my dad had gotten out of the stunt business a few years prior, moved to Arizona, and he began repairing restaurant equipment. So I called him up one day and I said, Dad, I've got no idea what you do for a living, but I know that there's opportunity in it and I want to come work with you. And that's when I left the stunt business and went to work with my dad in Windy City Equipment.
Okay, let me begin with, that is so cool. I was going to ask you, and I guess you just answered a bit, when it's a tradition almost that is so ingrained in the family, how do you change path? I guess your father led the way, but still, right? Grandfather, mother, like the whole ecosystem, the whole environment is, stunts is what we do for a living. So how do you get out of it? We're going to get to the podcast, guys. Don't you worry. But I think there is something here that is super interesting.
That's a really, really good question. I appreciate the thoughtful questions. I always love those. So I'll say that my dad didn't want to get out of the stunt business.
Okay.
He and my mom had split. So the only way that he was able to spend time with me is if he got a steady job and wasn't traveling all over the place because we only got to see each other every other weekend, kind of when I was growing up. So he got out of the stunt business so he could continue to, to have a relationship with me. And then, when I turned 17, that's when he, moved out to Arizona, hated the cold weather. And I had to figure this out for myself, and it was just, and he was always very supportive, he was a stuntman, so he supported me in following in those footsteps. But he also, he's a good guy. He just, he wanted me to make sure that whatever I was doing, I was happy doing it. One of the things he always says is, if you've got a passion for what you're doing, do it. He said, if you want to be a garbage man, just go out there and be the best damn garbage man there is, if that's where your passion is. And so, long story short, I had to discover for myself that my passion was not the same thing as my ego.
That is so good, man. So, was repairing restaurant equipment your passion then?
Really good question.
If I followed properly?
No.
Right.
It is not. It was not. It still is not. But as I got older, I was able to look at passion through a different lens. One thing I wasn't able to accomplish while I was doing stunts in the stunt business, I wasn't able to help somebody get through a family business on a weekend, if their oven was down. I wasn't able to hear thank you 1,000 times for getting somebody's equipment up and running. I wasn't able to build anything with my own two hands. I wasn't able to, influence business. I wasn't able to give people opportunities. Those are all things that I am passionate about. And those are all things that came with repairing restaurant equipment.
Okay, I love this. So I guess this ties a bit into what we are here for, right? Blue is the new white, the pod, Windy City Equipment. So how do you start, right? Because I think you mentioned a little story about starting in a restaurant. So how did you get there? Did you join directly your father and help him repair stuff? Did you directly thought about starting a podcast? How did all those pieces came together at some point?
Oh, that's a big question. Yeah, no, but it's an interesting one. So, and it's fun to kind of think back and how things line up when in the moment, you don't know that they're lining up, right? And this is how a lot of us go through life. And, something happens, we have no idea that it led us to something else. And then all of a sudden, here we are. So, in the stunt industry, especially during the writer's strike, first of all, it's not a glamorous business, right? And even if you are working, it's hard to make good, decent, consistent money until you get really, really high up and you're traveling all over the world. And so anyway, while I was coming up in the industry, I wasn't making enough to survive, really. I was getting jobs here and there, but it wasn't enough to truly live on. So I supplemented my income by being a host at a seafood restaurant called Sid's Seafood in Canoga Park, California. And so I would go hustle sets during the day, and I would go, greet people at night and try to wait tables if the owner would let me. And I did that largely so I could eat some food because I couldn't afford to buy food. But here's where it ties together, right? The owner came to me one day and said, we can't cook our food, our oven is down, our oven's not working. So, we've got to tell our guests that these menu items aren't available. And I knew this is what my dad did for a living. I didn't know anything about it, but I called him and I said, hey, I'm at this restaurant and the oven's not working. He goes, all right, well, go back there. Do you have a tool bag or something? So I got a tool bag from the owner. He said, check this, this, and this, and turned out, for those who know what anything about restaurant equipment, it was a thermocouple. Thermocouples are universal. They're used in HVAC and water heaters, all that kind of stuff, but it was just a thermocouple, and so he said, hey, check this, change that. So I did, got this guy up and running. Of course, he didn't give me extra money for it. I got another free bowl of soup, but hey, you know what? I'm not complaining because here's where it tied together, right? I was like, that felt really good. Because even though he didn't give me any money for it, he still said, thank you. He still said, that's amazing. Thank you so much for doing that. And so that was like my first experience into, kind of doing that. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is something that I could get into. So I didn't pursue it outside of my dad's business at the time. And, I still kept doing stunts, but I would come visit my dad in Arizona. And I would then go on jobs with him. We would move ovens around. We would, break down kitchens and put them back up. And, I would just kind of see and observe. So I was exposed to it a little bit more. And, so then finally when I came out, I said, all right, I want to learn everything from the ground up. I want to learn. And my dad is not a handout kind of guy. He is. And so there was no coattails, there was no silver spoon, there was none of that. And he said to me, Josh, if you want to learn this business, you're going to be in the shit with me. All right. And I said, okay, well, here we go. And that was culture shock. That was a whole different world for me. I was in Hollywood staying up till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, walking red carpets, living the glitz and the glamour. And then here I am slipping and sliding in restaurant kitchens on fryer grease, just trying to keep myself upright. It was different. It was really different. And so I learned how to be a technician. I learned how to fix the equipment. I learned all the safety procedures. I learned how to talk to customers. I learned basically how to be a mechanic, and I had to, put my stunt career completely behind me in order to have enough bandwidth to learn this. So once I started learning the restaurant equipment and how to fix that, then I took the next step. Okay, how do I schedule? How do I quote? How do I order parts? How do I, what is a P&L? I have no idea what a P&L is. I never went to college, right? And so I didn't know any of this stuff. I started reading a lot of books, wrapping my head around that kind of thing. And so eventually, we got to a point where I was able to understand not only how to fix the equipment, but how to grow the business. And so that was the initial, growth phase of Windy City Equipment. Fun story. I wasn't taking the phone calls when customers would call for a very long time. And so, my dad kind of hung on to that for a while. But he had to go back to Chicago for a family thing. And he said, all right, I think you're ready. I'm going to forward the phones to you. And I'm going to let you handle the calls this weekend. So, okay, sure, no problem. He never took the phones back. Never took the phone, and he was a very much sink or swim kind of guy. And as soon as he saw that I could swim, he just was like, all right, here you go.
It's yours.
So anyway, as we move forward, I can talk more about the growth and stuff, but eventually it led me to understand the opportunities that exist in these industries, right? And I became passionate about what this did for me, my growth, my family, the people that I served, and who I helped. So I wrote the book, Blue is the New White, 2019, published that. And then that turned into my podcast, which then turned into the academy that we teach people how to use and deploy effective soft skills, frontline, blue-collar individuals. Because the one thing that I learned throughout my entire journey is that you can have the best hard skills in the world, technical skills in the world. You can fix anything. But if you're a jerk to people, if you don't know how to carry yourself, if you don't know what it means to, be able to have a respectful conversation, intelligent, respectful conversation, then you can only go so far. And these people in these industries are too good to only go so far.
So to your earlier points, we can only connect the dots afterwards. This is Steve Jobs' quote on that. And I love the story because it's like, you figure it out as you go and it end up into, and we're going to discuss it further, but the success that it is now. Quick question. How did your dad learn fixing equipment, restaurant equipment? You learned from him, but how did he do that?
Good question. So when he got out of the stunt business and he needed to have a stable job so he could see me every other weekend, he became a foreman of a bakery in Chicago called Imperial Baking Company, for those from Chicago who are familiar. It was on Dempster Street. I think they owned a deli too. I don't remember the name. Kaufman's Deli, I believe it was. But anyway, he knew somebody who was an engineer or a foreman for a bakery. They worked together. That's how he learned. He actually, learned his skills in the big ovens, big bakery ovens, revolving ovens, huge walk-in. I'm hesitant to even call them coolers, right? These are walk-in spaces because this is you're talking 20,000 square feet of walk-in. So he learned on all of that, which was great. And then when he came out here to Arizona, this was like a much smaller scale, right? These fryers were smaller. The ovens were smaller. Everything was smaller. but it was all still the same concept. So, he was able to apply enough of what he learned to get a job out here fixing restaurant equipment. And then in order to supplement the gap in knowledge, he would call the manufacturers and say, I'm in front of this unit. This is what's happening. Help me understand, what to do next. So once he started doing that and eventually learned enough with that business to go out on his own, he made the leap to start his business.
He had to go for a weekend, so he gave you the responsibility of answering the phone and then never picked it up again. How did the transition happen? Because there is a world between, a moms and pops shop, in this case it's pops and son shop, to 65 employees, right? Which is where you're at right now. So how did that happen?
That's good. There's a lot in there. So the very first thing when I came onto the business, I said, I want to come onto the business and work with you, but I know there's opportunity here and I want to grow it.
What made you feel that?
The opportunity?
Yeah.
Because of the feeling that I got when I fixed that oven the first time at that restaurant. And I could tell that I saw the need. I saw the need firsthand when the restaurant owner was saying to me, I can't serve these people that are sitting in my restaurant waiting for their food. And so talk about connecting the dots, right? And so I think that that's how I knew inherently that there was opportunity. And I say no because I know now. At the time, it was probably more of like I really hope there's opportunity here, and I think there might be, So that was that. The first thing that he said to me after I said I want to grow the business is, fine, you deal with the employees.
Fair enough.
Yeah, which is okay. Listen, my dad will be the first to tell you, he's a mechanic now. He's not a businessman, and he never associated himself with that. To this day, he's still out there helping the technicians and, showing them how to repair mixers and stuff like that. But I said, okay. And we started small, made a couple mistakes. I'll kind of get into that. So
we all do.
We started to get too much business than we could handle. Both me and my dad, once I started learning and once I started running service, we were both running 6-7 calls a day. And that was a lot, so running, 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning to, 9 o'clock at night or whatever. And again, my dad's an old school guy, so I didn't make a lot of money. It was very minimum wage at best, probably not even minimum wage, but I'm not going to turn my dad in. But so I had to supplement my income again. And so I delivered pizzas at night. I would work in Windy City, and then I'd go deliver pizzas at night till about 11, get up and do the same thing the next day. But it was in the spirit of growth. Everything that I had went right back into the business. Every ounce of energy, every dollar, every cent, it went back into Windy City, because I knew that if my dad and I were at capacity, we needed to split, right? We needed to bring somebody else on to split that workload. So that's what we did. We brought on somebody. And our thought process at the time was, we can't afford to bring on, a full-fledged technician, because they're so expensive at the time even, right? And so we brought on somebody who had almost no experience and trained him. And our thought process was, well, this is a good thing because number one, we get to pay him less, right? He doesn't have any experience. And number two, we get to teach him the way that we do it, so there's no bad habits. We did that 2, 3, 4 times. And I will say that was our first mistake. If I were to go back and do it all over again, I would have brought on people who knew more than me, who were better than me and my dad at fixing equipment, and dealt with and corrected the bad habits if they had any. That prolonged our growth. And at the end of the day, none of those first employees are still with us. Even though I tried to drag them along as best as I could, but that was another lesson down the road. Yeah, so it started with that. We started to bring on the employees, and we started to get more business. We partnered with some manufacturers. We would do installs for an oven company called XLT Ovens, and we were still working out of my dad's garage when we would do this. And I think it was all the Little Caesars at the time, there was somebody who was replacing all of their ovens with XLT ovens. And I remember at one point, I was looking at my dad's garage, and these ovens, right, the boxes that they come in are probably 6 feet tall, 10 to 12 feet long, and about 4 feet wide. So they're big. There were 8 of them in his garage, 4 of them on the side yard, 6 more on the back patio, and the semi-truck was pulling up to deliver more. We got a call from the HOA not long after that and said, you guys have got to stop. You have to stop. you can't do this anymore. And my dad, being the smartass that he was like, well, the neighbor crafts. He's got a crafting business out of his house. What's the difference? And they were like, you have semis coming in 3 times a day. So, yeah.
I love this, man. So, so many things to follow up on. First of all, an opportunity only looks like an opportunity backwards. At that moment, it's a risk, right? So, of course, you knew it was an opportunity, but it was just like you had the feeling that this could go somewhere. And it's super interesting because I love the way you described it. Like you saw the pain of the guy. Like, I can't serve the guests, which also probably means less money for him, or if not no money for him, but like making people who came hungry and wanting to, eat some good food have to go back without their meal. That's so powerful. So how does that lead to you starting a podcast, Josh? Because clearly you have a gazillion things to take care of. Well, take the calls because that doesn't want to anymore. Hire employees, train them up, make up for the mistakes, run a business, grow, deliver pizzas in the evenings. So the book first. The book came first, right? Why do you decide to write a book?
Yeah, good question. So after we started bringing on more employees, business started booming, right? We moved out of the house. We got a warehouse, office space warehouse here in Arizona. And we were like, how are we going to fill all of this space? Well, I'm telling you, 2 weeks later, we were like, we need a bigger building. Like, this isn't good. And we were pushing like, I don't know, 7,000 square feet at the time, 6,500 square feet. So decent size, but I mean, it took off. So what we did was we brought on, at this time too, I want to mention, we were only doing restaurant equipment. We were only doing hot side, fryers, ovens, stoves. That's my dad's background. That's what he taught me. That's what the employees that we brought on, the technicians we brought on were doing. That's how we trained them. We had our customers asking if we could do refrigeration, if we could do HVAC, if we could do any of that. And
Interesting.
we couldn't. And I'm in Arizona, right? This is, I mean, it gets 120 degrees in the summertime. Like, this is a demanding environment for that kind of stuff. So we ended up bringing on a couple of incredible technicians, one of whom is still with us today, to open our cold side division. Once we opened our cold side division, the business took off because the demand was so high and our customer base was already so loyal. So we expanded into Tucson, Houston, Albuquerque, so 4 branches at the time, and the business exploded, landed on the Inc. 5000 list 3 times, fastest growing companies in America, 18, 19, and 20. But through this, I understood now the opportunity and the benefit in the blue collar industry. This is the same industry that my guidance counselor said, you're too smart to be a plumber. Go to college. Actually, he said you're too smart to be a stuntman, but that's neither here nor there. But this is the narrative we hear, right? Is that guidance counselors in high schools typically, hey, you need to go to college. You get good grades, you're a smart person, the next step is another set of formal education. And so I never knew the opportunities and benefits in the industry. I didn't know. Even coming from, Hollywood, I see people making millions and millions of dollars, actors and all these things. And I never knew the opportunity behind it. And I thought if I didn't know, then probably not a whole lot of other people knew too, except for these technicians who are raking in a ton of money. I know because I'm hiring them. Right. And they're coming from these larger organizations and they're like, we need these benefits, this wage, and on all these things. And I'm like, holy crap, like that's a lot.
Yeah.
So I was talking to my wife one night, Kelly, and I was complaining. I was saying something like, man, there's no resource out there. There's nothing to tell people about these industries, and wouldn't it be great if there was, because maybe more people would come and I could grow my business bigger and we could expand this. And she was listening. And finally she was just like, why don't you do it?
There we go.
And I was like, oh, I never really thought about that before. So I put some pen to paper just to see what would happen and kind of organized my thoughts a little bit and started to come together. So I worked on it for about like 18 months or so. And it really came together nicely, and I was able to do some research on how to get it published, and all of that. And so that's what led to writing the book. And that was a turning point in my entire career. What that book did, I didn't make a ton of money off the book or anything. And most authors will tell you that that's, the hard ROI from a book, unless you're a New York Times bestseller. Exactly. But the soft ROI, that was something that I hadn't experienced before. So the result of it was just amazing.
So what were the soft results that you got out of the book?
So it led to almost positioning me as a person of thought leadership in the industry, which isn't necessarily what I was going for. I was just trying to put out a resource for people. But the fact that people resonated with it so much, I had been getting calls, and I still get calls from schools all over the country, all over the U.S., wanting to buy the book and distribute it to their students and things like that. I'm able to, get on and talk with teachers, talk with students, which was great. It propelled my speaking career. I do public speaking. So once the book came out, people were like, "Oh, can you come talk at my conference?" And at the time I was like, yeah, sure. I didn't know. I didn't know how to price myself. I didn't know how to do any of that, but after some research, that soft ROI turned into a very hard ROI, which is fantastic, right? So that's another income stream for me, to be able to get up on stage and just talk about the things I'm passionate about.
That's so cool.
And then, one of the most valuable pieces that came out of it is the podcast. And this was, I had people calling me. I had people reaching out to me saying, "Hey, I want to tell you my story because I love what I do. I'm so fulfilled by what I do. I'm a tradesperson. And this is, I have found my own version of success." And I said, "Okay, cool." And I would have these conversations. And finally, I was just like, all right, well, I got to record these conversations. And so that's how the Blue is the New White podcast was born. And for 5 years, we were an advocacy podcast, just talking with tradespeople all over the world about why they love what they do.
So the reason I love your story, Josh, is because every time something happened that almost showed you that this was the way. Of course, I can only assume there was lots of hardships, things not going according to plan. But okay, you want to eat food, good reason enough to take a job in a restaurant. The oven, breaks down, and you see the pain of the restaurant owner being like, "I can't serve." Okay, there is something in here. Educational resources, something to help the industry. Your wife being like, "Hey, you should do it yourself." Boom. People reaching out to you to talk to you and be interviewed by you, tell you their story, and you need to record those conversations. I love that it happens so naturally. It's crazy. And it shows also that when you start something, when you set yourself in motion, opportunities will come. But you need to get out of your comfort zone and be ready to, take a hit to your ego, which I respect a lot.
Yeah. Actually, a very smart man once told me something that resonated with me and has ever since. And you just said it. And the way he put it was, freedom lies on the other side of discomfort.
Amen. That's so true. And so you build all those, at the end of the day, branding channels, right? You have the book, soft ROI, speaking conferences, talk on stage. You have the podcasts. How do you tie all this together with the business, if at all? But how is the Blue is the New White book, Blue is the New White podcast serving the business and vice versa?
I've been fortunate to have a lot of success, in life, and especially at my age. I've got people reaching out, asking how I did it. And of course, there were countless failures, countless hardships, countless things that I screwed up, to be quite honest, right? And but this, kind of to your point, one thing leading to another. My decision to get out of the stunt business is what paved the way, because then I began to work with my hands. I began to understand this industry. Everything that I've done separately is still tied to this industry. So, the business, I had to do that first. I had to fail. I had to learn. I had to grow. I had to actually get my hands dirty. I had to go through the cuts, scrapes, bruises, all of that kind of stuff to even understand why there was benefit or opportunity. And so the book helped position, again, myself as a thought leader in the industry, but it helps my business, but indirectly it helps all businesses, which was the point, all blue-collar skilled trade businesses, which is the whole point, because it's written in a way that it's supposed to appeal to the youth of the world, right? High school level-ish, but also with enough credibility so that educators will latch onto it and say, oh, shit, maybe I was wrong. Maybe there's opportunity here that I don't know as an educator or an influencer of these children. Because I think the newest statistic says that for every 7 people that are leaving the industry, this blue-collar industry, 1 person comes in. So by the year 2030, I believe it's going to be 40% of the industry is going to be gone, like just gone, which is going to do a whole lot of stuff to, pricing and economy and the way that these businesses operate. And now we've got AI in the mix and there's a whole thing around that. But yeah, no kidding. But, so it helps my business personally by attracting more people to the industry. But it's also a benefit of the entire industry as well. What do they say? All ships rise with the tide, right? And so this is me trying to influence the tide, because that line between what you can and can't control, I walk the hell out of that line and I still sometimes blur it. You know what I mean? So that was my attempt to rise the tide and get more people into the industry, which also helps my business. So there was that. So that's the book. The podcast. So the podcast has been wildly beneficial. And I didn't know anything about podcasting when I started. I just wanted to have cool conversations with cool people and put the industry again on a pedestal and put the spotlight on why, this could be a great career, almost for the same reason as the book, to try to attract more people. But what happened when I did the podcast is the relationships that I built during this podcast have been wildly beneficial for both the book now and for my speaking career and for Windy City Equipment, right? I have 2 executives on my team right now, my director of relationship management and my COO, my chief operating officer. Both were podcasts first. They were guests on my show, if you can believe it. I had no idea I was interviewing them for a job when I was interviewing them for my podcast. And they have come in and helped take my business to the next level because they resonated. Conversation like this, right? They resonated with what I was doing, what the business was doing, and they wanted to be part of it. And that's just one avenue. I developed relationships with technicians all over the world. Jim, I can go to anywhere, especially anywhere in the US, but anywhere in the US, Canada, and I know people in almost every state that, well, number one, if I expand my business out there, they'll come work with me in a heartbeat. Number 2, if I'm just vacationing out there, I have friends, they want to shake my hand. They want to, and I want to get to know them better, because virtually is great, but it's still not shaking hands and rubbing elbows. You know what I mean? So all of this kind of stuff, the benefits that came from the podcast itself, immeasurable, completely immeasurable.
I love this. So there are 2 things I want to hit on here. The first thing is a rising tide lifts all ships, I think is the expression in English. So in business, you can either try to make your piece of the pie bigger, right? By eating the pie of the others or trying to, rubbing elbows and actually, trying to get bigger at the expense of your competition. Or you can try and make the pie bigger, which is a much harder endeavor. Why choosing that path?
If I can be frank, I think I'm doing a little bit of both.
So, now we're getting into it.
So
good.
Yeah, listen, I'm a competitive guy too. So I think that competition makes people better. And I think the bigger the pie, the more competition, the better people get. Now, but make no mistake, I want to be towards the top of that. I still want as much of the pie as possible, but I want it to be bigger because there's still opportunity for everybody. So there's a dichotomy there for me. I wish I could paint this, great picture of sunshine and rainbows and let's all get along and link arms and, skip through the meadow together. But in the same breath, man, I'm like, okay, I want to win. And I want to win for me. I want to win for my family. I want to win for my business, my colleagues, my employees, my friends, and we all can.
So I'm going to do something here that I have never done on this podcast. It's for the video version, but hopefully people will see. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you my wallpaper. Josh, it doesn't get more real than this. This is my wallpaper.
Oh, look at that. So man, you're right there. Like you and I are cut from the same cloth, Just
it's
win.
like, yeah, exactly. So for the people listening to us only, so my wallpaper on my screen and my phone, so it's just win, full stop. No excuses. Everybody's having hardships, like at the end of the day, what matters is winning. So couldn't agree more with you. I love this. And if you make the pie bigger at the same time, you're becoming the go-to authority in your niche. And that's just how it goes.
Survival of the fittest has always been a thing.
Amen. I've never thought of podcast as a recruiting tool. This is awesome. Can you tell me more about this? Because it wasn't intentional, I guess, I understand. But how do you explain that?
It goes back to connecting those dots, man. I didn't know why I was starting a podcast. I just wanted to have cool conversations with cool people. Maybe introduce some more people into the industry. And I think at the end of the day, especially when you're talking about leadership in business, there's a big component of connection, alignment. You get more in a podcast interview, Guillaume, than you do in an employment interview. In an employment interview, you're asking very pointed, scripted questions, right? And you're weighing the answers against several different candidates. What we're doing right now is connecting. You're asking me thoughtful questions based on what you heard me say previously. And I think that through that, you gain alignment. Through that, you gain trust. Through that, you gain a glimpse into what the person you're talking to values. And if those values happen to match what you're doing in your business or otherwise, then, the rest is it falls into place. So yeah, I didn't set out to use it as a recruiting tool, but the people that I met connected so well with me in the business that it just made sense to bring them in.
Whew, this is music to my ears. What's next, Josh? Because you have had quite some good feelings about where the opportunities were. So what's next? I think there is a rebranding of the podcast plans. You have a passion project as well. So where is all this headed?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking. So I'm a born entrepreneur. This is one thing that I've found about me. So I'm gonna take it all the way back for a second so I can answer that question. So when I was in high school, I was doing stunts still, right? And I was teaching the stunt school. I was kind of taking that bull by the horns, but I needed more money, right? I couldn't work in Hollywood at the time. I still needed jobs. So I started small side job businesses all the time. I think one was called S&J Odd Jobs. It was my friend Sean and I, and eventually it was just me, but I would go around to the neighbors and just move rocks or dig holes or whatever they needed me to do, right? I lived on a farm in Wisconsin, so I would put this flyer in everybody's mailbox, and our houses were like half a mile apart, right? And so I would ride my bike up and down the street and just put this flyer in the mailbox. Actually, the mailman came in one day and said, "You got to stop doing that. It's illegal. I know you're like 12 or 13 years old.
Story.
Yeah, but you got to stop." So I want to preface that by saying I'm a born and bred entrepreneur. And what that means is that I love to pull levers and push buttons in businesses, including my own, right? This is why we've grown from 0 to 65 employees and been on the Inc. 5000, all that kind of stuff, which is so awesome and so fun. But, once the business reaches a certain point, it's not like I'm done, but I have a draw and a pull to do it again and again and again. And, it's just something that I truly enjoy. I love building business. And so, and I treated the book and the podcast almost the same way. But so I say this because the next step for me is BitNew Academy. BitNew is the acronym for Blue is the New White, BitNew Academy. And this academy is so near and dear to my heart because it can help all the people we were just talking about, from business owners to frontline blue-collar individuals, by giving them financial acumen and soft skills ability, right? And this is an online self-paced learning course, but the first of its kind for our industry, specifically tailored to people in the blue collar space, right? I know these people, they're salt of the earth. They love what they do and why they do it. And unfortunately, because of why they got in it, they don't know a lot of these skills that are usually reserved for when somebody's going into a executive leadership or management position, right? But, what I like to say is, what if, to all the business owners out there, right? What if every employee was your best employee? What would your business look like? What could you do next? Where could you take it? My dad used to come in and say, man, this guy's got great skills, but man, if we could only teach character. And I was like, what if we could? What if we could? And I understand that there's a difference between soft skills and character, but if you can understand, hone, and deploy soft skills in the appropriate manner, that is practical leadership. And if you can do that at every level of your organization, then your business can see exponential growth. We've already gotten this into the hands of some blue-collar business owners, just launched at the beginning of the year, and they're seeing 25% growth in revenue, 30% growth in profits. I mean, it's because people are understanding not only how to carry themselves and why it's important to treat others with respect, but also what the finances of the business mean, because this has been taboo in this industry for a long time. People have been afraid to tell, their frontline employees anything about, the P&L or the books. So I walk that line very carefully, but I tie to, how their actions, the frontline employees, how their actions every day impact the bottom line of the business, and how that impact goes all the way back to their success, right? The business, they can't succeed unless the business succeeds. And they're in the driver's seat of that. It's up to them if the business succeeds. It's not up to me. It's not up to the owner. It's not up to one person. It's up to the team. So everybody's got to play their part. So that's my passion project. And right now we've got 2 courses: Blue Collar Hero, which is soft skills, leadership, conflict resolution, the ability to transfer knowledge, right? How to teach, and a couple more. We're adding more to that course all the time. And then frontline financials, which is what I just described, kind of shows people how their actions impact the bottom line of the organization.
I mean, not particularly. I was just going to mention that I'm on the website right now. The thing that I love is that on the welcome screen, on the homepage, there is this gentleman that we are talking to right now with the background like, let's go to walk. I just love this. And it looks good, man. And I love this. So yeah, just to comment on this, I'm in the service business as well. And that's something you realize as you grow, right? We are 2 years in business, 35 employees, heading to 40. And it's like everybody, all the big business owners, all the successful people, they say it's all about the people. You realize how true that is when you can't just do it all anymore yourself, right? Because there's just too much work. You need to hire people. And you see the difference between a superstar employee and a C player. And it's like, it's not a times 2, it's not a times 3, it's like a times 10, times 100. And it's crazy. So having something like this for a very specific niche, because that's what's important as well, niching down, it's just so good. I guess that's my 2 cents.
No, I appreciate you saying that, because you're absolutely right. And I say all the time, doesn't matter if you're B2B, B2C, it's all person to person. It's all human to human at some point.
What about the podcast, Josh? What do you have for us here?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. So the podcast, as I mentioned before, was an advocacy podcast for about 5 years. Same name as the book, Blue is the New White, right? It's the name of it right now. Just last year, we made a slight adjustment to our main audience. We found that our listeners were largely business owners who resonated, right? A lot of skilled tradespeople in there as well, but I think it was like 55 to 60% business owners. And so we shifted to bring on guests who could help business owners run, grow, and scale their business, which aligns really well with my passions, as you now know, which has been amazing. And it's been really phenomenal. It increased the types of guests that we could have on, instead of just people in the blue collar space, people who can help people in the blue collar space, business owners especially. So that's been incredible. And so now it's almost, we're finding that because we're talking about this business that can be translated to almost any other industry, we're bottlenecking just a little bit by calling it blue is the new white, creating a almost an exclusivity factor, which can be a good thing sometimes. In this case, we're after reach because I want to help as many people as we possibly can. So we're in the process of rebranding the show. We are going to bring it to episode 200. So that should be about July or so. Won't tell you the new name of the show just yet, but I will say that it is about business, leadership, and becoming the person you were meant to be. And really tying back not only how to run, grow, and scale the business, but what it takes as a person to be able to do that, and challenging whether or not you actually want to.
Boom. Well, and if you want to know the name of the new name of the podcast, just go ahead and subscribe to Blue is the New White by Josh Zolin. Josh, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus. We'll put all the link towards the different resources that you mentioned in the description, right? So people can go and check it out if they want. Thank you so much for coming, man. It was a masterpiece.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. Thank you so much for asking such insightful questions.
Thanks, man.